Of all the years I've spent on this earth, one question has always plagued me. What is our purpose? Were we born simply for this? To live autonomously, wandering through the empty husk we call life? Were we created for something more than this? To reach higher planes of knowledge and potential? Or are we just the playthings of unfathomable beings that not even the throes of man's blackest thoughts could comprehend? You may not believe the events I recall tonight. I don't blame you, for I've yet to fully realize them myself. One thing is for certain. I reached the threshold of the Godhead. Television in the modern era has changed immensely since the 80s. In the age of plastic, it seemed as if everything was available through Hotline. Cars, toys, tools, sex, you name it. Every night, beautiful colors would flicker from the obelisk, their dance reflected in my young eyes like pygmies around the first flame. Its words fed our brains. It brought us joy, knowledge, and some nights, sadness. But I never once thought that such a blessing would bring my family such ungodly terror. I'll never forget that cold autumn night. My family tended to follow routine, so it seemed as if every night we all encircled the television after the final meal of the day. We would mainly stick to whatever my parents chose, much to my chagrin, but being my age, I couldn't do much but to accept what was allowed. On rare instances, they would turn in early and leave my sister and I to our own devices. Tonight happens to be one of those nights. Immediately as they ventured off, I grabbed the clicker post-haste. My dear sister always got what she wanted, but tonight was my night. She whined and grimaced, but soon accepted that we would be watching MTV until dawn. Hours passed as musicians the likes of Black Sabbath, Dire Straits, and Yes beamed out of the incandescence. I remember looking at the clock in amazement at how quickly time had trickled by.
3:33. Ash, Mom is going to kill us if we don't get to bed. Come on, let's go.
My sister opened her eyes, agreeing groggily. Just as I was making my way towards our TV, a sudden, sharp ringing pierced my eardrums. Then it began. I'll never forget those awful, awful words. God, they still haunt me to this day.
It's the freak phone, and here's the party freak, Freddy Freaker.
The audio sounded like it had been run through a blender and spat back into a tin can. It screeched, louder than any of the musicians we had idolized ever dreamed of playing. Through the drowning static, I could hear what sounded like a sequence of numbers. The image on the TV was absolutely indiscernible. I did everything I could to make out what was behind that wall of static and sound. Just barely could I see a figure gyrating through the white death. I was enamored. I needed to know what was lurking through this impregnable technological terror. Why was it aired like this? Was it our TV? The only thing that caused such an anomaly would be a storm, but the only hint of rain was but a trickle on the window pane. That's when I saw him.
$2 a call.
He shrieked. As soon as I saw his face, I couldn't help but scream, louder than even he. He, or rather, it, had the face of a man deprived, or rather, depraved? He looked of a man stricken with leprosy, and it seemed as if jaundice had made its home there as well. My sister turned to me and saw the hellish nightmare that adorned our once beloved box. She ran as fast as she could upstairs, knocking damn near every trinket hanging off the walls of our family home. I knew I was in trouble the second I heard the loud, racing footsteps of my father crashing through the hallway upstairs. I tried and I begged and I pleaded for him to believe my tale of the freak, but he didn't listen. He didn't care. God, I wish I tried harder than I did. There was no changing his mind. My father was a stern man, and he did not like being woken up before work. I felt a slight relief now being locked in my room. Usually I would be upset being damned to such a prison, but I wanted nothing more than to be away from that thing. But even as the wooden panel and stairwell separated us, I couldn't escape the thought. Just what did I see? What were those numbers? My head spun at the prospect of new discovery. I had to know what I had just witnessed. They say man's greatest weakness is his lust for knowledge. The memory played in my head over and over again. I did everything I could to piece together the blueprint laid out before me. I knew those numbers meant something. I could feel the pain of them being etched into my mind. And then it came to me. 1-900-490-FREAK. It was a hotline. Had my fears been for naught? Had the feelings of horror that I had felt really just been the work of some fat slog's corporate monetization scheme, laughing away as he wallows in his fetid pile of gold? But it seemed as if the freak were calling out to me, whether it was a cry for help or something greater. I had to know. With the numeric sequence firmly embalmed within the wrinkles of my brain, I slowly crept out of my room and down the stairs. "Hello, Frederick," the disembodied voice bellowed from the tiny speaker within our telly. It could have been my imagination, but I swear I could feel the heat of his exasperated, stifled breathing seeping through the phone. I quickly slammed it back down on the hook. Who was that? It didn't sound like the man on the TV. I've never heard a voice so gravelly. It was as if the man had never gone a day in his life without a coffin nail. But one thought slowly crept up on me. How did that man know my name? I stood there, frozen, my mind racing with questions and regret. Then I smelled it. That horrible, horrible scent. It was unlike anything I'd ever whiffed before. It raided the still air like U.S. troops on the beaches of Normandy. The bastard stench was strong enough to bring a man to his knees. But what was causing it? From the deafening silence, there was a faint sound. The turning and scraping of metal on metal. I could hear the front door handle violently shaking. Whatever was on the other side soon realized it wasn't getting in that way. I was stricken with fear. I was frozen in place, so much so that it felt like the cold hands of death himself were holding me in place. My heart was racing. I wanted to scream, but I would almost rather face the beast than feel the lasting wrath of my father. But this had to be a dream. All of this. It had to be. There's no way a phone call could trigger all of this. Tension released, and I almost laughed at my utter foolishness. To think that some TV hotline could summon something that resides only in the night terrors of children. A phone call could trigger all of this. Tension released, and I almost laughed at my utter foolishness. To think that some TV hotline could summon something that resides only in the night terrors of children. Taking a deep breath to regain my composure, I ventured to my chamber. And then I saw it. The unsightly abomination that had plagued my thoughts and manifested in my reality. It stood waiting, watching outside of our bay window. It had the frame of a malnourished youth, but it was well past the height of the glass that stood between us. I knew what the wicked thing was. Its gaze pierced my soul. Any hope of this being a dream was long forgotten. The fear was too real. I couldn't process what I was seeing. The very sight of the damn thing was driving me mad. In the reflection of the moonlight, I could vaguely make out that sickly yellow skin I saw before. It had teeth of razors and blue eyes that could pierce the heart of any man unlucky enough to be caught in their gaze. Its arms were outstretched, as if to offer some solace from these horrors in the form of a comforting embrace. It was Christ-like, but its face was nothing short of malice. I prayed that it hadn't seen me, but who was I kidding? We had been locked in the periphery of one another for what seemed like hours. I knew I had to escape, but how? I took one last look at the freak and saw his cracked lips begin to twist into a smile. I ran faster than I could put into words. The racket of shattered glass set off behind me as I could hear the thumping of heavy footsteps. I could hear the wet squish of flesh in every thump. What in God's name was this thing? What have I done? Why me? I ran into my room, trying my hardest to close the door quietly and calm my breathing. I could still hear it sloshing through our home, searching for whatever poor victim it could find. Did it only want me? I did summon the abomination after all. What would it do if it got me? My sister? My parents? Questions plagued me as I quivered under my checkered blanket in my race car bed. I did all I could to shield my frail sanity from what lied behind that door. The footsteps grew closer and closer, and then silence. I knew it was outside my door. I knew it had found me. The familiar creaking of the doorknob rung through my ears again. I clenched my pillow tightly, whimpering, crying, scared of childhood's end. The thumping grew closer and closer to my bed as I could make out the shadowy figure through the translucency of my blanket. The sheet was thrown back and all the air left my lungs. It was my father. I knew all of this was just some horrible, horrible dream. There's no way anything like that could ever exist in reality. I embraced my dad with tears in my eyes. I had never been so happy to see him in my entire life.
Hey, buddy, are you alright?
He asked in his caring voice. My father could be terrifying when he wanted to be, but he was one of the kindest and most loving people when the time was right.
Come on, sport. Big boy, don't cry. You're 13 now. Remember what we talked about yesterday, Freddy? It's time to grow up.
The pitch of his voice lowered and lowered the longer he clamored on. My face was buried in his chest, so much so that I didn't even notice the familiar voice I knew distorting into something nightmarish. That horrid aroma filled my nostrils again, and it was in that moment I knew. I opened my eyes, praying to see my father, but I was greeted with the abhorrent figure that I feared most. Tried to scream, but words refused to form. The freak smiled, for he knew that he had won. I watched my home grow smaller and smaller until it was all but a memory as the freak dragged me deeper and deeper into the burrow. I could feel my head cave. It was as if my skull was breaking in two as my jawbones began to contort to an impossible degree. I could feel the splitting of my veins like tulips being uprooted from soil. The stretching of muscle and cracking of marrow was a pain I cannot even begin to name. God, it hurts. Oh, God, it still hurts. It was then I realized that the freak was within me all along. And these freaks are here to party.